What if the person you trusted most in the world left you a gift that destroyed everything you thought you knew about family? This is the story of Margaret Lawson, a 78-year-old grandmother whose final act would tear apart the family she spent a lifetime building, and the young woman who would have to choose between keeping a precious gift or saving the people she loved most. But before we dive into the chaos that followed, you need to understand that this isn't just another inheritance dispute. This is about secrets that had been buried for decades, and a grandmother's love that would prove stronger than death itself.
Margaret Lawson wasn't born wealthy. She was born determined. After her husband Robert died unexpectedly when their children were still young, she single-handedly raised 3 kids while working 2 jobs to keep their house on Maple Street. That house became more than just 4 walls and a roof. It was their sanctuary. Every scraped knee was bandaged in its kitchen. Every birthday candle was blown out in its dining room. Every teenage heartbreak was mended in its cozy living room. For the last 5 years of her life, Margaret wasn't alone in that house. Her granddaughter Emily had moved in after college, originally planning to stay just a few months while job hunting. But months turned into years as Margaret's health declined. While Margaret's 3 children visited occasionally, David with his briefcase and worried expressions, Linda with her latest boyfriend and dramatic stories, Thomas with his get-rich-quick schemes and empty promises, it was Emily who was there for the ordinary moments, the quiet Tuesday afternoons, the sleepless nights when the pain was too much, the gentle conversations about life and love and what really matters. And Margaret noticed everything, every sacrifice Emily made, every job opportunity she turned down to stay close, every evening spent reading aloud when she could have been out with friends her own age. In those final months, Margaret made a decision that would change everything. She called her lawyer, not to write her first will, but to rewrite the one she'd made years earlier. What she was about to do would shock her family to its core. But here's what none of them knew. Margaret had her reasons that went back further than any of them imagined. And when the truth finally came out, it would redefine everything they thought they knew about love, sacrifice, and what it truly means to be family. Margaret passed away on a Tuesday morning in October, with Emily holding her hand. The funeral was everything Margaret would have wanted: simple, heartfelt, and focused on the love she'd given rather than the wealth she'd accumulated. David Lawson, 55, had built a successful accounting firm but never married, claiming he was too busy taking care of everyone else. Linda, 52, was on her 3rd marriage and 2nd career, always searching for something she couldn't quite name. And Thomas, 48, had a resume full of failed businesses and a checking account that rarely stayed positive for long. They all loved their mother, but if we're being honest, they were also thinking about the inheritance. The house was worth at least $400,000, maybe more in today's market. Margaret had savings, a small investment account, and a life insurance policy. Not a fortune by any means, but enough to change each of their lives. The will reading was scheduled for the Thursday after the funeral. Emily almost didn't come. She felt like an outsider among Margaret's children, despite having lived with her grandmother for 5 years. But Margaret's lawyer, Harold, had insisted she be there. I want to begin by saying that Margaret revised her will just 3 months ago. She was very specific about her wishes and asked me to read it exactly as written. The first part was predictable. Margaret's savings were divided equally among her 3 children, about $15,000 each after taxes and final expenses. Her jewelry went to Linda, her books to David, her gardening tools to Thomas. Small, personal items that reflected what she knew about each of them. Emily received Margaret's recipe collection and photo albums, sentimental gifts that made her smile even through her tears. It seemed like Margaret had thought of everyone, distributing her love along with her possessions. And now, regarding the family home at 1247 Maple Street, along with all furnishings and fixtures, I leave this property in its entirety to my granddaughter, Emily Margaret Lawson, with the hope that she will fill it with as much love as it has given to our family. The silence that followed lasted maybe 10 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. You could actually hear the clock ticking on Harold's desk, the traffic outside, someone's stomach growling. "I'm sorry, did you say Emily gets the house?" The entire house? There must be some mistake. Grandma wouldn't, I can't. This is insane! Mom was confused at the end. Everyone knows that. Harold, you have to contest this. She wasn't in her right mind. But Harold had been practicing law for 30 years. He'd seen families implode over money before, and he could smell the storm coming. I can assure you that Margaret was completely lucid when she made these changes. I actually recommended she wait a few weeks to make sure, but she was adamant. She said, and I quote, "This is the most important decision I'll ever make. So let me get this straight. Emily gets a $400,000 house, and we get what, $5,000 each after taxes? That's what 40 years of being her son is worth?" What happened next was like watching a dam burst. Years of buried resentment, unspoken jealousy, and family dysfunction came pouring out all at once. Emily, you have to understand how this looks. You lived here rent-free for 5 years while the rest of us were building our own lives, supporting our own families. Rent-free? David, I took care of her. I gave up job offers in other cities. I gave up dating. I gave up my entire 20s to make sure she wasn't alone. Oh, please. You act like you're some kind of saint. You knew exactly what you were doing, didn't you? Playing the devoted granddaughter while the rest of us were busy with our actual lives. This is where the conversation took a dark turn, because Linda had touched on something that had been bothering all of them. The nagging suspicion that Emily had somehow manipulated their mother. Look, Em, I'm not saying you did anything wrong, but Mom always had a soft spot for you, and you had access to her every single day. Maybe you suggested things, or maybe she felt guilty about you taking care of her. Are you seriously accusing me of elder abuse? Of manipulating Grandma Margaret into changing her will? She was sharp as a tack until the day she died, and you all know it. Nobody's accusing you of anything, but you have to admit this doesn't make sense. Mom always said the house would be divided between her children. Always. Linda, you remember those conversations, right? Absolutely. She used to joke about how we'd have to arm wrestle for who got which bedroom. It's not what she really wanted. Someone influenced her. But what none of them realized was that Emily had been asking herself the same questions. Why had Margaret left her the house? It didn't make sense to her either. She'd loved her grandmother deeply, but she'd never expected or wanted to inherit anything substantial. You want to know what's really crazy? I asked her about it once. About 6 months ago, she started talking about making sure I was taken care of. I told her not to worry about me, that I'd be fine. I even said I thought the house should go to you guys. She just smiled at me and said, "Emily, sweetheart, sometimes the people we love most need protection from themselves." I had no idea what she meant. Look, even if that's true, the fact remains that this inheritance could solve all of our problems. David, you've been talking about expanding your firm, but you can't get the loan. Linda, you and Rick are about to lose your condo. And me? Well, you all know about my situation. Emily, I didn't want to tell you this, but Rick and we're 3 months behind on our mortgage. This inheritance isn't just money to us, it's survival. And this is where Emily's heart broke a little. Because suddenly, she realized that her family's anger wasn't just about greed or fairness. They were drowning, and they'd been counting on their mother's legacy as a life raft. What if we sell the house and split the money 4 ways? I never wanted to keep anyone from what Grandma intended. That's generous, Emily, but you're missing the point. This will isn't legal if Mom wasn't competent when she signed it. We need to contest it, get the original will reinstated, and divide everything properly. And there it was. The line in the sand that would divide this family for months to come. David moved fast. By the next morning, he'd consulted with 3 different attorneys and begun building a case to contest his mother's will. His argument was simple. Margaret had been under the influence of prescription pain medication, and Emily's daily presence had created an environment for undue influence. Meanwhile, Emily found herself living in a house that no longer felt like home. Every creaking floorboard seemed to whisper accusations. Every family photo on the mantelpiece seemed to ask, "Did you manipulate her? Did you know what she was planning?" 3 weeks after the funeral, Emily made a discovery that would change everything. Hidden behind Margaret's winter coats, she found a wooden box with her name on it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all in Margaret's careful handwriting. "My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and my children are probably furious with you. I'm sorry for that, sweetheart. But there are things you need to know about this family. Things I should have told them years ago, but never found the courage." The first letter revealed something that Emily had never known. Margaret hadn't just worked 2 jobs after her husband died. She'd taken out a secret second mortgage on the house to pay for David's law school, Linda's art classes, and Thomas's first business venture. She'd never told them because she didn't want them to feel guilty about their success. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was what Margaret had discovered about her children as adults. David hasn't visited because he's busy. He hasn't visited because he's embarrassed that his business is failing and he can't afford to help me anymore. Linda doesn't call because she's scattered. She doesn't call because she's ashamed that she borrowed $20,000 from my savings 3 years ago and never told you or her brothers. Letter after letter revealed Margaret's growing awareness that her children saw her and the house primarily as financial security. David had been calculating its value for years, planning to use his inheritance to save his struggling firm. Linda had already promised her husband they'd use the money to buy a bigger place in a better neighborhood. And Thomas had been dropping hints about his big plans for his inheritance since Margaret's 75th birthday. "They love me, Emily, but they love what I can give them more. You're the only one who ever loved me for myself. You're the only one who chose to stay when staying was hard and leaving would have been easier." But the letters contained one more revelation that would explain everything Margaret had done. And it was sitting in the last envelope, marked, "Only if you decide to keep the house." While Emily was discovering her grandmother's letters, the legal battle was escalating. David had found grounds to contest the will based on suspicious circumstances surrounding its creation. Look at the timeline. Mom changed her will right after her hip surgery when she was on heavy pain medication. Emily was her only regular visitor during that period. And here's the thing that really bothers me. Emily was the one who drove her to the lawyer's office. I knew it! I knew something was off about this whole thing. Emily's been playing the long game this entire time. I mean, it does seem like a huge coincidence that Emily happened to be there for every major decision Mom made in her final years. What they didn't know was that Emily had been doing her own investigation. She'd called Margaret's doctor, her pharmacist, even the neighbors. Everyone confirmed the same thing. Margaret had been completely lucid and had actually seemed more purposeful and determined in her final months, not less. Your grandmother was one of the sharpest patients I've ever had, right up until the end. She asked detailed questions about her medication, kept meticulous records of her symptoms. If anything, she seemed more focused on making sure her affairs were in order. But Emily's research only made the family situation worse. When she tried to share what she'd learned, David accused her of fabricating evidence. Linda suggested she was brainwashing everyone she talked to. Even Thomas, usually the gentlest of the siblings, started avoiding her calls. The family that had once gathered every Christmas morning in Margaret's living room was now communicating only through lawyers. Birthday cards stopped coming. Holiday plans were canceled. The house on Maple Street, once filled with laughter and love, became a symbol of everything that was broken between them. Emily found herself isolated in the very place that was supposed to be her inheritance. She'd inherited a house, but lost her family. And late at night, lying in the bedroom where she'd nursed Margaret through her final illness, she wondered if keeping the inheritance was worth destroying the relationships that mattered most to her. But Margaret had anticipated this exact moment. She'd known her decision would cause pain, create division, maybe even destroy relationships. So why had she done it? The answer was waiting in that final letter. And when Emily finally found the courage to open it, the truth would be more heartbreaking than anyone had imagined. 6 weeks after the will reading, with the legal battle growing uglier every day, Emily finally opened the letter that would explain everything. My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, then you've decided to keep the house despite everything your uncles and aunt have put you through. I'm proud of you for standing firm, but I'm also heartbroken that it's come to this. There's something I never told any of them. Something I probably should have shared years ago. The house isn't just our family home, Emily. It's your birthright in ways they could never understand. What followed was a revelation that explained not just Margaret's decision, but the complex family dynamics that had shaped Emily's entire life. Your mother, Sarah, was supposed to inherit this house. I had always planned it that way. But when she was 18, we had a terrible fight about her boyfriend, your father. I thought he was wrong for her. Too old. Too irresponsible. I said things I shouldn't have said. Emily had always known that her mother had died when she was young, but she'd never known the full story of why Sarah had been estranged from the family when it happened. Sarah moved across the country to prove she could make it without me. She was pregnant with you when she left, though I didn't know it then. By the time I learned about you, she was already sick. Cancer, Emily. She was dying, and she was too proud to call me for help. The photo showed Margaret meeting Emily for the first time at the hospital where Sarah died. Emily was just 6 months old, and Margaret was 53, suddenly responsible for a grandchild she'd barely known existed. Your uncles and aunt never fully accepted you, Emily. They loved you, yes, but you were also a reminder of their sister's absence and my failures as a mother. David resented the financial burden you represented. Linda was jealous of the attention you required. Thomas just felt displaced as the baby of the family. Suddenly, Emily understood so many small moments from her childhood. Why she'd always felt like an outsider at family functions. Why her uncles and aunt had always been kind, but never truly warm. Why Margaret had been so protective of her, so insistent that Emily was special and deserving of love. This house was always meant to be your mother's. Now it's meant to be yours. Not because you earned it by taking care of me, though you did that beautifully, but because you are the only one who loved this family without expecting anything in return. You are what I hoped all my children would become, but somehow failed to nurture in them. P.S. There's one more thing hidden in the basement, behind the old water heater. This will help you understand why I had to make this choice, even though I knew it would hurt my children. Sometimes love requires us to be strong enough to disappoint the people we care about most. That night, Emily descended into the basement she'd avoided for years. Margaret had always said it was just storage, nothing important down there. But behind the old water heater, Emily found a metal filing box that would rewrite everything she thought she knew about her family's history. The documents told a story of financial sacrifice that went far beyond what Margaret had revealed in her letters. After Sarah's death, Margaret had not only raised Emily, but had also quietly bailed out each of her adult children multiple times over the years. David's successful accounting firm? Margaret had provided the startup capital and co-signed his first business loan. Linda's art school education? Paid for entirely by Margaret, who'd taken a second job at 55 to afford the tuition. Thomas's various failed businesses? Margaret had invested over $75,000 of her retirement savings in his schemes, never expecting repayment. But the most devastating discovery was a thick folder of medical bills from Emily's childhood. Emily had been born with a serious heart condition that required multiple surgeries and years of specialized care. Margaret had paid for all of it, never letting Emily know how close they'd come to losing the house to medical debt. At the bottom of the box was a letter from Margaret's financial advisor, dated just 1 year before her death. It painted a picture of an elderly woman who had given away so much of her savings to her family that she was secretly struggling to pay her own bills. Mrs. Lawson, I must strongly advise against lending Thomas another $15,000. Your retirement account cannot sustain these withdrawals. If you continue at this rate, you'll outlive your savings within 3 years. Margaret's handwritten response was clipped to the letter. Harold, I understand your concerns, but I can't let my children fail when I have the means to help them. Please process the withdrawal as discussed. Emily realized that Margaret hadn't left her the house because she was the favorite grandchild. She'd left her the house because it was the only asset Margaret had left after decades of secretly supporting her adult children. The house was Emily's inheritance, not because Margaret loved her more, but because there was nothing else left to give. The final document was a ledger Margaret had kept meticulously. David had received over $125,000 in business loans and emergency funds. Linda had cost nearly $100,000 in education, medical bills, and bailouts. Thomas had consumed more than $150,000 in failed investments and personal loans. Margaret had already given each of her children their inheritance. The house wasn't a gift to Emily. It was the only thing Margaret had left after a lifetime of giving. But this revelation created a new dilemma for Emily. Should she tell her family the truth about Margaret's finances and risk humiliating them? Or should she let them continue believing that their mother had chosen favoritism over fairness? The decision became more urgent when Emily learned that David's legal challenge was gaining momentum. He'd found a sympathetic judge and a willing witness, Margaret's former neighbor, who claimed she'd seen Emily pressuring Margaret during one of their garden conversations. Emily made her decision on a rainy Thursday morning in November. She drove to David's office with Margaret's box of secrets, knowing that what she was about to reveal would either heal her family or destroy it completely. "David, we need to talk, and you need to call Linda and Thomas. There are things about Grandma that you all need to know." While Emily was discovering her grandmother's letters, the legal battle was escalating. David had found grounds to contest the will based on suspicious circumstances surrounding its creation. Look at the timeline. Mom changed her will right after her hip surgery, when she was on heavy pain medication. Emily was her only regular visitor during that period. And here's the thing that really bothers me. Emily was the one who drove her to the lawyer's office. I knew it. I knew something was off about this whole thing. Emily's been playing the long game this entire time. I mean, it does seem like a huge coincidence that Emily happened to be there for every major decision Mom made in her final years. What they didn't know was that Emily had been doing her own investigation. She'd called Margaret's doctor, her pharmacist, even the neighbors. Everyone confirmed the same thing. Margaret had been completely lucid and had actually seemed more purposeful and determined in her final months, not less. Emily decided to start with the hardest truth first. "David, do you remember asking Grandma for help starting your firm 15 years ago? You told her it was just a temporary loan." "Emily, what is this? Where did you get these?" "She kept records of everything, David. Every loan, every gift, every time one of you needed help, and she gave it without question." "These numbers? Emily, these can't be right. I never borrowed anywhere near this much money." "Art school, $35,000. Your divorce attorney when you left your first husband, $8,000. The down payment on your first condo, $12,000. Emergency medical bills when Rick had his accident, $15,000. The loan you took last year when your gallery failed, $20,000. She never made me feel like a burden. She always said it was no big deal, that family helps family. My God, the restaurant, the food truck, the catering business, she funded all of them, didn't she? Every single venture, Thomas. Even when her financial advisor begged her to stop. Even when she had to take money from her retirement fund. This is when the real emotions started to surface. Not anger about the inheritance anymore, but shame about how they'd failed to see their mother's struggle. Guilt about how they'd taken her generosity for granted. And devastation about how they'd attacked Emily for receiving the one thing Margaret had left. She was struggling financially, wasn't she? All those times I offered to help with her bills, and she said she was fine. She had $3,200 in her checking account when she died, David. The house was literally all she had left to give. We've been such monsters, haven't we? Fighting over scraps when she'd already given us everything. But Emily wasn't finished. She had one more revelation that would change everything they thought they knew about Margaret's final decision. There's something else. Something she never told any of you because she didn't want you to worry. Grandma had cancer. She was diagnosed 4 months before she died. She knew she didn't have long, and she knew she needed to make decisions about all of us. Cancer? But she never said. She seemed fine when I saw her last Christmas. She was protecting you, all of you. She didn't want her illness to overshadow her final months with family. But she also knew she had to make some hard choices about who could handle what she was leaving behind. That night, for the first time in 2 months, the family was together in Margaret's house. But everything had changed. The anger was gone, replaced by grief for the woman they'd lost and shame for how they'd honored her memory. I keep thinking about all those times she asked how the business was going, and I complained about cash flow, about needing to expand. God, she must have thought I was asking for money. I used to call her when Rick and I were fighting about money. I'd vent about our mortgage, our credit cards. I thought I was just talking to my mom. I didn't realize she was listening like a banker, calculating how to help. She never once made me feel like a failure. Even when my businesses crashed, even when I came to her desperate and broke again, she'd just hug me and say, "Next time will be different, Tommy." Emily realized that this moment, all of them together, finally being honest about their relationships with Margaret, was exactly what her grandmother had hoped for. Not the fighting, not the pain, but this reckoning with who they'd been and who they wanted to become. I want to tell you all something. I'm not keeping the house. But I'm not giving it to you either. Not yet. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to sell the house and put the money in a trust, not for any of us, but for the next generation. For your kids, David, for Linda's stepdaughter, for whatever family Thomas builds someday. Grandma Margaret spent her whole life giving her children what they needed in the moment, but it never taught you how to stand on your own. This time, we're going to do something different. The money from the house sale will earn interest for 20 years. In the meantime, each of us contributes to it. Whatever we can afford, whenever we can afford it. It becomes a legacy fund for the kids, for their education, their first homes, their dreams. So instead of inheriting money, we earn the right to give it. It's what Mom would have wanted, isn't it? For us to learn how to take care of each other instead of just taking care of ourselves. This could actually work. If we're disciplined about contributions, if we're transparent about the finances. David, I'm not putting you in charge of this. I'm not putting any of us in charge. We're hiring an independent trustee, and we're all equals in this decision. This was Emily's masterstroke. She'd learned from Margaret's letters that David's need to control, Linda's impulsiveness, and Thomas's unreliability had all contributed to their financial dependence on their mother. The trust would force them to work together as equals. Something magical happened that night as they sorted through Margaret's possessions, deciding what to keep, what to donate, what to preserve for the trust. They started talking about their mother not as a bank account, but as a person. They shared stories Emily had never heard, revealed struggles Margaret had helped them through, admitted mistakes they'd made, and lessons they'd learned too late. Do you remember how she used to make those elaborate Sunday dinners, even when money was tight? I thought she just loved cooking. Now I realize she was making sure we all came home every week, that we stayed connected. She was always working in that garden. I used to think it was just a hobby. But she was growing vegetables because groceries were expensive, wasn't she? Look at her face in this picture. She's so proud, but she also looks exhausted. I was so focused on my achievement that I never asked what it cost her to be there. The healing didn't happen overnight. It took months of family therapy, difficult conversations, and learning how to rebuild trust that had been shattered by grief and misunderstanding. But slowly, something beautiful began to emerge from the wreckage. David discovered that letting go of control didn't make him weak. It made him a better brother. He started asking for help instead of assuming he had to solve everyone's problems alone. You know what Mom used to tell me when I was struggling with a painting? She'd say, "Linda, honey, you can't force beauty. You can only create the conditions for it to emerge." Sounds like she was talking about more than just art. Thomas channeled his big dreams into community organizing, discovering that his real talent wasn't for business, but for bringing people together around common goals. When it came time to sell the house, something unexpected happened. The real estate agent suggested they could get more money by selling to a developer who would tear it down and build condos. The profit difference was significant, almost $100,000 more. It's a lot more money that could really make a difference for the trust fund. But is that what Grandma would have wanted? Someone buying her home just to destroy it? You know what? Some things are worth more than money. Let's find a family that will love this place the way we did. They found the perfect buyers, a young family with twin toddlers who fell in love with the house's character and history. When Emily told them about Margaret's garden and the reading nook and the kitchen where 3 generations had learned to cook, the buyers offered to send updates and photos to the family. The sale went through in February, almost exactly 1 year after Margaret's death. After real estate fees and taxes, the trust fund started with $340,000. Not a fortune, but a solid foundation for the next generation's dreams. 5 years later, the Lawson family looks nothing like it did the day Margaret died. David's business recovered not because of an inheritance windfall, but because he learned to ask for help and accept advice from others. He's engaged now to a woman who loves his vulnerability as much as his strength. Linda finally found her artistic voice by painting local landscapes and teaching art to seniors at the community center. She's still with Rick, but their relationship is stronger because she's learned to be honest about money and realistic about dreams. Thomas discovered his real calling working with kids, organizing community sports leagues and after-school programs. He's not wealthy, but he's respected and genuinely happy for the first time in his adult life. And Emily? She used the clarity she gained from Margaret's letters to finally pursue her own dreams. She became a social worker specializing in elder care, helping other families navigate the complex emotions of caring for aging parents. The Margaret Lawson Family Trust funded its first dream this year, David's son's engineering degree. But more importantly, it gave the family a reason to stay connected, to meet quarterly, to share their struggles, and celebrate their successes. Listen to this. Dear Lawson family, we wanted you to know that we've kept Margaret's rose garden exactly as it was. Our daughters love playing tea party on the back porch, and we tell them stories about the wonderful grandmother who used to live here. Thank you for trusting us with such a special place. Margaret's house was still bringing families together, just not in the way anyone had expected. So what did the Lawson family really inherit from Margaret? Not money. She'd given most of that away years before she died. Not property. That became someone else's foundation for new memories. What they inherited was something far more valuable. The understanding that real love doesn't keep score. That family isn't about what you get from each other, but what you choose to give. That sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is the chance to discover who you really are when everything else is stripped away. Emily's note to her grandmother simply read, "Thank you for teaching us that the best inheritance isn't what you leave behind, but what you inspire others to create." Margaret Lawson's will did not just divide her estate. It revealed the difference between inheriting wealth and inheriting wisdom. Her children thought they were fighting for their financial future. What they discovered was something much more precious. A family finally honest enough to heal itself. Sometimes the most generous thing you can do for someone you love is refuse to make their life easy. Sometimes the cruelest kindness is teaching them to save themselves. And sometimes the will that seems to shatter everything is actually the one that puts it all back together.